Imagine this. You wake up one morning in 2020 and suddenly the entire planet has hit pause. Planes vanish from the sky, streets fall silent. Hand sanitizer becomes liquid gold, and for the first time in history, introverts everywhere whisper, "Finally, our time has come." Now, some people went full sourdough survivalist. Others panic-bought toilet paper like the apocalypse involved extra digestive activity. But for one woman in the English countryside, lockdown wasn't a nightmare, it was oddly poetic. While the rest of us were baking anxiety bread and doom-scrolling Twitter, she was out in the garden watching skylarks rise like tiny feathery drones. She had peace, primroses, and apparently the world's most wholesome Wi-Fi connection. But behind that calm was a much louder story, one that exposed how privilege, luck, and leadership, or lack thereof, shaped who thrived and who didn't during the pandemic. So, let's rewind. The year is 2020. The world is on fire metaphorically and, in some places, literally. But our narrator? Retired, mortgage-free, country home, no dependents. Basically, the cheat code for surviving lockdown. Her biggest problem? Whether the Swifts would arrive on time. Spoiler, they did. She'd wake to birdsong instead of sirens, stroll through wild garlic and cherry blossom, and name wildflowers with titles that sound like 18th century pub names: Tufted Vetch, Stitchwort, and Bachelor's Buttons. Meanwhile, city dwellers were renaming their Wi-Fi locked up since March and arguing over who finished the last can of beans. Her days were simple: reading books, organizing cupboards, maybe the occasional heroic attempt to use WhatsApp. Honestly, if peace had a sound, it'd be her Blackbird soundtrack. But while her world looked like a Studio Ghibli field trip, others were trapped in very different realities, because not everyone had a garden and a library. Some had one-bedroom flats, no income, and neighbors who thought personal space was a myth. Domestic violence soared. People died alone in hospitals. Kids fell behind in school. And while ordinary citizens were scrubbing groceries, world leaders were, well, throwing parties at Downing Street. Yeah, that happened. While care home staff were working 12-hour shifts and NHS workers were reusing masks, politicians were pouring wine under fairy lights. It was hypocrisy so loud it could be heard over a national clap for carers. Now, here's the part that hits harder than any headline. The pandemic wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a test. And not everyone studied. In the UK, the government had known a pandemic was likely. The 2015 National Risk Register even gave it odds up to a 50% chance within 5 years. But when COVID hit, there weren't enough masks, ventilators, or gowns. Why? Because austerity had already run the NHS to the bone. Instead of acting fast, officials hesitated, flirted with herd immunity, and ignored WHO advice. When ventilators ran short, older patients were quietly deprioritized. And when contracts finally rolled in for PPE, billions went to friends of friends, people who'd never sourced a surgical glove in their lives. £4 billion worth of unusable PPE was eventually burned. Literally burned. Imagine the smell of corruption with a hint of melted latex. While politicians dodged accountability, the people left behind began building something of their own. Not in parliament, but on a wall. Families for Justice and the activist group led by donkeys decided if the government wouldn't honor the dead, they would. So they found a spot, a long grey wall stretching along the Thames, facing Parliament like a silent accusation. They didn't ask permission, they didn't wait for approval. Early one morning in March 2021, volunteers, many who had lost loved ones, started painting hearts. Red hearts. One for every life taken by COVID. By the time the sun set 10 days later, there were 150,000 of them, each one hand-painted, each one personal. Some bore names, some carried messages, and together, they formed a river of grief flowing straight toward the seat of power that had failed them. Technically, it was vandalism. Emotionally, it was history. They called it the National COVID Memorial Wall, a people's monument that didn't need permission to exist. Every heart, A reminder that behind the statistics were birthdays, inside jokes, half-read books, and empty chairs at kitchen tables. And here's the twist: the wall was never about anger alone. It was about memory, about saying, "We remember, even if you'd rather forget." So, when you walk along that stretch of the Thames today, each heart whispers something louder than any speech, the story of how ordinary people turned loss into legacy. COVID changed the world. For some, it brought stillness and reflection. For others, it ripped the floor out from under them. But it left behind one unshakable truth: when governments fail, humanity doesn't. Because sometimes, when the system paints over pain, the people pick up the brush themselves. If this story moved you or even made you rethink what remembrance really means, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Where were you when the world stopped, and what did you learn when it started again? Because history isn't written by the powerful, it's written by the ones who refuse to forget.